YouTube bound community, ESQ fans, David Beard fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens. We're here today, joined by Editor-in-Chief, Mr. David Beard of ESQ. How's it going, man?
I'm great. I so just so that everybody knows, right before we got on here, we were having a little fun, and I just kind of wanted to. So there's a comment out there on one of my videos that said I'm the Joker in the striped shirt. So I have my Mike Love Robert Graham shirt ready, and I'm going to put it on momentarily. But first, I for those who feel that I'm kind of a Mike Love guy, I just thought I would just dive into that and hope that everybody wants to come for the ride. So this is the Robert Graham shirt. Now, I'm sure there's photos of Mike wearing it, but if fans would recall the Sirius XM June 2018 celebration of the Royal Philharmonic Beach Boys album, if you will, hosted by Rob Reiner. Um, this was the shirt that Mike wore, Bruce wore, and David wore, and it's my understanding that they had 5 shirts. They had a shirt for everybody backstage, but both Al and Brian refused to wear them. I'll be wearing mine, um, in protest to Al and Brian not
No,
wearing theirs.
no striped shirt freedom.
Striped shirt freedom,
Yeah, the big 60s screaming. Yeah.
like the harmonize. So now here's for those who don't know. This shirt has got Mike Love inside the back collar here. This is the collar,
That's
and
so rad. I
this
had no
is
idea.
this is his autograph is embroidered. And then once you put the shirt on here, I'll go ahead and put the shirt on. I want everybody to understand what I'm getting into here, literally.
Here we
Um,
go.
yes, oh, the Joker in the striped shirt. So I do have I purposely put the Brian Ding Dang button on here to
Nice.
offset the fact that this is a Mike shirt. If I had some sort of Al swag, I'd put that on too.
Oh, that'd
And
be
then
so
some
rad.
I see. So I got Brian's representative. And actually, you know what? Next time I should have been better prepared. I have a Carl button. I'm pretty sure I have a Dennis button. I should have had the whole group
You
represented.
can deck that
But
thing out.
but no, I'm a Mike guy, so why would I do that? So anyway, here's the collar, the cuff, I should say, not the collar, the cuff, and there's Mike again in all his glory on there again. So if you weren't sure what type of shirt you're wearing just because you have it up and Mike's cleverly hidden back here,
Yeah,
and
just
you did a reminder,
look
and
down.
he's on both cuffs.
Every time you check your watch,
So you can put your cuffs together and have a Mike Love concert.
it's a duo. You know
Hey
what the
man,
brothers from Mike.
I'm in a silly mood. So this is the cool thing about this shirt. I will tell you, and I don't think it's available anymore. Is the song titles are actually in the stripes.
I noticed something was. It looked like something was written in the song in the stripes.
It's like
Yeah,
I mean, like Kokomo, Good Vibrations, Surfing USA, I Get Around, all that stuff, Fun, 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 all are in these sleeve. All these stripes. The song titles are in it. It's pretty
that's
cool.
so cool. All the hits, all the big ones.
Associated with the guy who wrote them. Guess who? So, well, since we're on this, and we're going to talk about Brian significantly here in a moment, but
Absolutely,
Mike just got finally inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame,
he
and
did. He
I hope
did.
to be doing a Zoom with him very soon
Oh, that's cool.
to talk about that. I
Yeah,
think the ceremony will be in June in New York City. So, but that
that.
is cool because Brian got in the early 2000s.
Yeah,
And it's kind of like it's one of those things like if Lennon got in or McCartney got in, I like it more. It would have been cooler if Lennon and McCartney got in together, and Brian and Mike would get in together. That type of thing where it's just kind
yeah.
of a. But Brian did more than and worked with other lyricists, so I understand the him getting in sooner. But I'm just glad Mike got to see it in his lifetime.
It's gonna be an awesome ceremony. I mean, not only is Mike gonna be there, but George Clinton from Parliament Funkadelic. It's gonna be a crazy night, man. Like I'm a huge P-Funk fan, so having the
Okay.
Beach Boys and P-Funk in the same room, I gotta get tickets, man. I'm in. That's a collaboration I would love to see. But yeah, no, it's great that Mike's got the award coming up for him. He's definitely written some fantastic lyrics, and he wrote some of the most iconic words of the '60s. I mean, he wrote the lyrics of "Good Vibrations." I mean, come on, like one of the most iconic songs of all time.
Yep.
And Kokomo. That's what he may have written Kokomo as well, but. He hasn't told anybody about that one yet.
I'm not sure. That's a gray area.
It's
He
a
really
little,
hasn't.
a
He
little.
really hasn't touched on that very
When
much.
when you Zoom with him next week, ask him if he wrote that one because
So
there's a lot
Mike, yeah,
about that. It's
one of the songs I'm curious about that you don't really
very
often mention.
unclear.
That's really cloudy on is Kokomo. What did you? Where was your involvement? A little. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned Kokomo, and Kokomo to me is just like this beautiful amalgam, and not even what it was for the radio. I mean,
Yeah,
just in terms of us, and not its placement in Cocktail, just from what it actually represents as a recording. I mean, you have Jim Keltner not on quote drums, but he did all the percussion.
question. Yeah,
Uh, so speaking of Kokomo, you know, it's interesting that the song started with Scott McKenzie and Papa John Phillips. Now,
right.
Scott McKenzie he had one hit wonder basically. It's if you're going to San Francisco to be sure to wear some flowers. It's such a great song,
Great
and it's
song, man.
so period. When you hear it, you feel that period.
Yeah,
And then
wonderful.
Papa John Phillips, of course, from Mamas and Papas.
That's right.
Terry Melcher heard this recording, and Terry Melcher, because of his production background from the '60s with the Byrds, so now you have Scott McKenzie, Papa John Phillips, and Terry Melcher. So right there, it's kind of like old school
Super
California.
group.
It's kind of like there are American traveling Wilburys slowly being built here, but it wasn't the same because it was a song that Terry took from Scott and Papa John
Right,
Phillips. It
right.
wasn't, hey, come into the studio and let's work on these things together. It was kind of like to take your song from you and do something else with it and see if I can get it fully fleshed out. Which he did a great job. He also did it with Fairy Tale Girls, which became Somewhere Near Japan, which to me is a great song. But again, look who it started with.
Right.
It started with Pop John Phillips. So you got Van Dyke Parks, Jim Keltner, Ry Cooder, Joel Peskin, who's on
Oh yeah.
all sorts of stuff for the guys. But Terry Melcher, the Get There Fest and We'll Take It Slow, is actually from a song called Mexico by Terry from his 1975 album Royal Flush.
Whoa.
Yeah,
I knew that. That's cool.
that phrase appears in that song in '75. And I heard that I just was listening to that song one day, and this is of course after um, Kokomo had come out years later. And I
Yeah.
was just, and I've got his two albums. The first one that's just self-titled, and then the second one was Royal Flush. And I like his stuff. It's different, but man, so I heard Mexico. Let's go down to Mexico. We'll take it. We'll get there fast. And we'll take it slow. And I went, okay, wait a minute.
That sounds familiar.
Where do I know that phrase from? And it's sung differently. For the Beach Boys, with Carl, they kind of they arced it out more. It's more of a standout moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the Aruba, Jamaica, "Ooh, I Want to Take You," that doesn't
Yeah.
exist on. So that's where that came through. But I mean, that's a pretty impressive lineup of musicians. Who cares? Who cares who it's by? That it's a Beach Boys record. And Mike came in there and worked his. He didn't do much. I know that he changed. He's famously said that he's changed the tense of the where we used to go to where you want to go. So it
Okay.
was a present day thinking.
Still
But
go there.
anyways,
Yeah.
Mike's contribution. God bless him. I'm glad he's going into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. He deserves to be there, and I'm looking forward to talking to him about it and you
Yeah.
know getting his reflections. Uh, yeah, it's just nice to see it happen. So yep, okay. That's all I'm
Tell
going to say about Kokomo. That's all there is to say about Kokomo.
us.
I mean, we know the Kokomo. Oh, but I guess I'll do the shameless plug. So this is the fall 2018 edition of Endless Summer Quarterly, and it covers really California Dreamin', Rock and Roll to the Rescue. So post '85 album all the way through to the Still Cruisin' album. So
Yeah. I
that's
remember the issue vividly. I remember getting that one and being like, it's so cool you can read about this one specific era that no one really dives deep on. And I was Yeah, I remember that cover specifically.
I liked, man, I liked the 85 album. I know we're gonna get off topic here. I love the 85 album. We've talked about that before. And when the Made in USA came out and it had a black and white video with Papa John Phillips. So here all of a sudden he's leaking in. This is pre Kokomo,
Yeah,
pre somewhere near Japan.
right,
But he shows up with Michelle Phillips and Roger McGuinn and in the black and white California Dreamin' video. And it was just so, and that followed Rock and Roll to the Rescue.
right.
Those two songs were, I mean, it was Rock and Roll to the Rescue was everything I could have wanted from a Beach Boys recording
Awesome song. It's
in
fun.
June of '86.
Yeah,
I mean, they're singing about their rock and roll roots. It's basically a rock and roll doo-wop song without the wops in it.
yeah.
Um,
And
and
Brian is
Carl's in that raunch kind of keeping the summer alive, darling
he's so good at
vocal.
that song. He soars on that song.
He does. It's
When he
great.
rips that little rock and roll roar that he does, man, nothing's better than
Yes.
that, man.
I love Al singing about getting his parents' records out. I mean, this is the whole thing is great.
That his
That
kids,
whole that whole
that
song, I'll
kid's
tell
records out.
anybody, nowadays we would recommend Sounds of Summer, but
Yeah,
gosh, that I think I'd be hard, now that we're talking about it, I would want to point people in the direction of the Made in USA CD for the mere fact that Rock and Roll to the Rescue has kind of gone off into obscurity. California Dreamin' survived different.
that's popped up, and it was on Stranger Things recently, so that has had a
That's
running.
right. It got kind of a
Yeah,
resurgence and
yeah,
got because it was on the season three about 2 years back is when
something
it
like that. Yeah, those kids were all.
they created a brand new video for it
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
on the Beach Boys channel and everything. So it was really great to see. It was what they took the '86 video and they made it like 4K or something.
Ate it or something. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, Man of the USA was a cool record. I remember hearing that tape when I was a kid. We had it on cassette, and that was the first time I heard Heroes and Villains, and
Oh,
it
wow.
scared the hell out of me. It was like, I'm like all for the ba ba dip dip dip, and all of a sudden this
Right.
I've been in this house on the back in the city. I'm like, what is this craziness? I'll never forget that tape. Still got it
It's
somewhere. Yeah.
Heroes and Villains is gosh, it's so easy to talk about all this music.
What a band.
I mean, it's the only psychedelic barbershop song I've heard in my entire life.
It might be the last one too. Not a very particular genre that
You
people
can't,
come
no one's cracked the code.
No one, yeah, no. Speaking speaking of code cracking, I'm gonna link this into what
Okay,
we're here
okay.
for tonight
This is
because
what we're actually supposed to be talking about.
yeah, because code cracking is I would feel a cool way to introduce the topic for tonight, where we're gonna talk about the latest issue of ESQ, part two of Brian's productions outside of the Beach Boys in the early '60s. And for those uninitiated in how deep the Beach Boys go, Brian did a lot of work outside the Beach Boys in those days. So not only was he writing, producing, and touring and doing radio and interviews for his main group, he was doing the same kind of stuff behind the scenes for up and comers and his girlfriend's band and really enjoying every second of it. If there's one thing to take away about Brian, it's that he still loves working with other people. It's been a thing that he's always enjoyed doing. And when I was reading the issue, what struck me the most was how number one, how sharp everyone's memories were about these times and the names that they bring up, or having lunch at Marilyn's house when Jan and Dean come over and her mom's making them lunch and stuff. These cool little anecdotes about just how normal life was. Like things weren't huge yet. Everyone was just hanging out at people's houses. They weren't big rock stars yet, but they were known. Um, when you were doing these interviews, I know some of them date back a couple of years, some of them are new. What was sort of a couple of things for you that struck you in terms of the community that existed back then, for everyone kind of knowing each other and working together, and how Mike was really involved with a lot of this stuff too. It wasn't just Brian. What was it like to talk to these people and learn about that community back then?
Um, it's kind of the only word that's coming to mind is enchanting. It's just I'm
That's a
not
good
sure
word.
why.
I can see that.
Brian work and so in part one we have interview, and so part one, and then the new edition, part
I
two.
love the cover for both. They're so good. The hat
The
graphic.
idea is he's going to chronologically age as the year of the
Yeah.
magazines come out. So talking to Cheryl Pomeroy of Bob and Sherry, and the word Bob is going to come up a lot. So Bob being Bob Norberg,
Hmm.
who is Brian's roommate in the Crenshaw Boulevard apartment. What we don't know, Bob is still with us, but Bob is notorious for declining interview requests.
Yeah,
He's a
maybe tell me
sweet
about
guy because I know several of his friends, and I know they're very sweet people. And it was never like a terse response of no, I'm not. Tell that guy to take on. It was never that. It was no. I respectfully decline. And then once the first edition came out, Dave Nolan of the Survivors, who's in touch with Bob all the time, he reached back out to Bob without me even asking because he was so pleased with the results. He was Bob. Well, here it is. What do you think? And Bob still said no. But Bob wanted two extra copies for his children.
That's sweet.
So that told me
That's really sweet.
I was successful in communicating Bob's importance
Oh
um,
yeah.
in those early days because without his participation, so I address it in the winter edition in my editor's notes. I say something to the effect, I just want everyone to understand Bob Norberg's importance here. And
Yeah.
to what you were asking about, that sense of community, Bob was very much involved. There's still an unclear timeline as to when Brian and Bob moved in together into the
Right.
Crenshaw Boulevard apartment. That is still a question mark. 62, 63. I would
63.
imagine 60
Yeah.
something at some point. Because
Right.
when I interviewed Cheryl Pomeroy, she talks about going over to the house, where Murray was.
Right. Oh,
She
boy.
mentions that, but then Victoria Hale, aka in those days Vicky Coker, she came in right after Sherry and joined Bob as Bob and Vicky. They never released anything, but
Right.
thanks to her asking for a mix of a thing before she left the studio, she ends up with an acetate. Thank God she asked for it. And she
Imagine
had Bob sign it and she signed it. So then she's got this great collector's like whatever. If she had not asked as she walked out of the studio, that would have been it.
have been it. Nothing. Yeah.
And that's crazy to me. But so what Vicky talked about was the Crenshaw apartment, and there's even I included in that issue a full page handwritten note that Brian left under Vicky's
I love
windshield
that.
wiper, that the hand drawn map from the Crenshaw Boulevard apartment to the new house he had just bought on 108th Street, and it said sold to the guy in the Grand Prix. Sold to the guy in the Grand Prix. And it's just, I mean, I get these things, and let me see what he wrote. He wrote, sold to the boy in the Grand Prix, $180 a month. So it's stuff like this that's throughout both of these editions. So not just these really insightful interviews and discussions from the communal standpoint of Dave. Well, for Dave Nolan, he moved to Los Angeles and happened to move into the apartment on Crenshaw Boulevard
Yeah.
that was right next to Brian and Bob. So by the time he moves, when he comes into the picture, 63 at some point, Bob and Brian are living together right next door to him, and that kind of becomes a little guys in their young 20s little hub of music making. Brian, you have to understand, was uh, wanted to be anywhere but in the house in Hawthorne because of his father.
Right.
He wanted to have more creative freedom to just work on whatever it was that came to mind. And the other really interesting thing to me, the communal element, was how they would just kind of play stuff for each other. Like Brian would go over to Dave's apartment and say, "Listen, I want you to hear this." And Brian had like a microphone and his guitar and an amp in his room, very little furniture. So it was imagine. I think anybody at that age who's in that kind of circumstance of music making, I had those lean days. I had an efficiency apartment when I went to broadcast school. It had a bed, and my refrigerator and my table and my sink were all in the same room together, and my
Yep.
TV were all in the same room together.
Same
And
here.
so that's they had a two-bedroom apartment. The Crenshaw Boulevard was a two-bedroom apartment. And
Right.
then when they moved to 108th Street, I think that was a three-bedroom house.
Yeah.
And Mike ended up pretty sure that this is a correct timeline statement. Mike would move in there March of 63 because of his divorce or separation with Fanny. But
Yeah.
again, I know when he got that took place, and then Dave Nolan has specific memories of Mike being in there, sleeping in his room on a sleeping bag. So, and Al, he also has specific memories of Al unpacking his car and taking equipment into the 108th Street house.
It's so cool.
So that really speaks to the communal sense that these guys and it's because of who they became and the success that followed.
Yeah.
It that was one of the really cool things to me is you're touching on it, this kind of sense of we're popular, but the world famous thing isn't quite taken off
It
yet.
happened.
This
Yeah.
is before the Beatles arrive.
Right.
This is before I get around. This is Brian trying to figure out what is next for him.
Yeah.
So he's a creative person. I guess he's thinking of himself as a musician and a songwriter. I don't know how much he's literally thinking of himself as, oh, I'm going to be a producer or an arranger or this, that, or the other thing.
Right.
He's trying it out. It's like taking a deck of cards and just tossing them out in front of you on a table and saying, yeah, I'm going to see if I can't do all,
Yeah. What
play
can I
all
do?
these cards, see
Right.
what and what's going to stick and what's going to happen and what's going to work. And so I think he was just a young man in his 20s that was trying to figure it out and trying to figure out. And again, he had Bob as a writing partner.
Yeah.
He would soon meet the Beach Boys in '62 had a residency at Pandora's Box,
Right.
and Ginger Blake, cousin of Marilyn, Diane, and Barbara Rovell, um, who were the Rovell sisters at that time on their own musical act. Uh, Ginger was dating Gary Usher. They go to Pandora's Box. They see this group called the Beach Boys perform. Ginger gets in touch with Marilyn and says, I want you to come with me because they were at a residency there, so they were playing one night after the other. Come
Yeah.
on back with me. They come back. Brian spots Marilyn in the front row. He spills the hot chocolate on her, as it's famously told.
Right.
And Brian, what doesn't get told often from that, and I wish it were told more often, but it's covered in the magazine, is they're invited backstage to sing. And so each one of these things, it's almost the same story every time. With Cheryl Pomeroy, she's at this birthday party for one of the frat brothers of Bob Norberg. The Beach Boys are playing that.
Yeah.
They walk up and meet one another. From there, discussion. Murray Wilson says to Cheryl Pomeroy, you should come over and record. And that's how the first Surfer Moon, and the first Surfer Moon from Bob and Sherry is actually on the Hawthorne label. And if you look closely, that's the Wilson's home address.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
so
Right.
Murray was getting into but Murray was being a producer.
Yeah.
So then there's a lot of questions there. Vicky comes along because Cheryl gets married. Everybody has speculated for years. You look anywhere, and it's Bob and Sherry broke up because they were having fights, and then they would make up and make love, and then they would have another fight again. And none of that's true. Bob was dating Cheryl's best friend, Ann Williamson. And that's how they all met. Anne said, "Come with, let's go to this party," and they would meet, etc. So it's really all kind of untangles a little bit.
You're
Now
right.
there's always questions left over, but this is nice to have gathered all this together because then you get Vicky. She comes into the picture. That doesn't work. Now it's funny. All these women have told me, and they're all young women. They all have young sounding voices.
Yeah.
Each one of them told me. So Sherry from Bob and Sherry, Vicky from Bob and Vicky, and Sharon Marie all told me Murray came into the studio and said, "Sing younger."
Yeah.
So Murray was after something himself. So the communal thing I love hearing, and that's something I can have a conversation with Ginger and Marilyn and anyone who might remember it all day long, because I love hearing about the familial element of this story. And it's not a music, when you're talking about Marilyn's parents, you're not talking about a music story necessarily. But I just love hearing that Brian felt comfortable there. He would stay the night there. And this is even so I knowing the timeline as I do, so it seems to me that Brian would go over to the Rovels, maybe stay there even after he moved into his Crenshaw Boulevard apartment. But
Right.
I think that initiation of him moving, kind of going out, and maybe it was October of '63. Brian, again, not clear. Brian's first production, and I do a sidebar on it because the whole Gary Usher thing is even a whole nother story.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's a significant story in this early days. And so Brian at some point moves into the Crenshaw Boulevard apartment, I believe in '62, but we don't know the timeline. Gary Usher goes over there. I do have a photo of him in Brian's Crenshaw apartment.
That's cool.
Yeah, I have a photo of Brian in his Crenshaw Boulevard apartment. And I think, yeah, I don't have Bob Norberg. Man, oh man, he's hard to have a photo of. That I have photos of him, but I
Yeah.
had to take them from stills taken from promotional video of him from when he was in Bob and Bobby,
Right.
which was a '64, '65 thing that I don't think Brian had anything to do with.
Interesting.
Um, so it's just all very interesting to me because I love, I think we all, when I went to broadcast school, I had like a gang of guys I hung out with. Now we weren't creating music, unfortunately, but it was fun. So, and it was like a hang, like on the weekends we'd go and do different things. And
Yeah.
so I think of it that way when I hear these stories, that it was just very humble beginnings. And Brian was Brian was a sponge probably until '67
I'd agree.
in terms of the absorption of ideas and willingness to work with others.
Yeah.
And then I think, and once the demand once the rush of the demand caught up to him and kind of held him down emotionally and mentally, I
Yeah.
think that's when the sponge kind of dried up. That
Yeah.
doesn't say he was still an ambitious and creative person,
Oh, of
but
course. Yeah.
but it took him until December of '68 to work with the Honeys again in a production, and he tried in '67 to work with Ravenwood,
But
which would become Three Dog Night, but that went by the wayside, and there's different accounts as to why that is, and I hope to get into that in a future issue.
not by his fault, I would say.
No. Well, it was interesting. I did an interview with Arnie Geller, and Arnie Geller shared a story with me that I printed where he walked in with Brian. It was for a Ravenwood session, and Brian walked into the studio and he said to Arnie, "I'm not," based on the vibe of the studio or something. He told Arnie, "Tell the guys I'm not doing it today," and he left.
Right.
So he left Arnie to tell them, and Arnie said in the interview, if I'm remembering correctly, I hope I am, that Brian didn't think they were good enough.
We'll
So
never.
Danny was a very good friend of his at that time. They became
Oh yeah.
very close.
You were good buddies.
So
Yeah.
it would make sense to me that Brian wouldn't want to say that to Danny
It's sure.
because he'd be concerned that he would hurt his feelings. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping to get an interview with Danny Hutton. I put out a request. I hope that comes to fruition
Great.
because I think that would be critical
Yeah.
to this story. Um, but yeah, so it's very fascinating to me the living with one guy who who's kind of a collaborator, Bob Norberg,
Yeah.
and then Rich Ilarion is a. I hope that there's an interview out there somewhere in the ether that somebody can refer to know. But Rich Ilarion was one of the survivors. They were Dave Nolan, Bob Norberg, and Rich Ilarion were actually the survivors, with Brian kind of being a ghost member.
Sure. Right.
Um, they recorded Witch Stand, and if you watching this on YouTube, after you're done watching, type in Witch Stand, and it's on Day Lim's channel, and he does this great AI version of it, so good that when Dave Nolan of the survivors heard it, he freaked out. He thought it was amazing. So that tells you how good this is. It's an AI. It sounds like it's actually the Beach Boys. So Rich Ilarion, from my understanding, helped Brian write a couple of songs. I don't know how many. Could be
Hmm.
three, could be four, could be two. And they had a gentleman's agreement or a buddy agreement that Brian said, well, listen, as opposed to giving you credit on the Beach Boys album, do you mind if we don't do that? Because Brian was either communicated it or was thinking in the back of his mind, my dad's going to give me a hard time.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So is it okay if I do something for you in exchange for you helping me with lyrics for these songs?
Yeah.
And that was kind of the deal that was struck. So they recorded Witchstand. They went down to Capitol Records. It was rejected. And Dave Nolan tells the whole story in the magazine about how pissed off Brian was. I mean, it's a story. I mean, this. So they go down. So then Brian, for whatever reason, turns to a Dion, and it's one of the few times in the group's history that they do this. And they record the song Pamela Jean. And for collectors, if you don't have Pamela Jean, if you have the Beach Boys albums, you can hear Car Crazy Cutie. It's the same melody. And Brian would do that a number of times. Sharon Marie's Thinking About You Baby, that would later become Darlin'.
Yep.
The song by the Castells, I Do, which was actually an unreleased Beach Boys song, basically recorded the same way.
Yeah.
Jan and Dean's Sidewalk Surfing is Catch a Wave, revamped. I mean, the list goes. I mean, there's a handful, and even Bob and Sherry's and Bob and Vicky's, the Surfer Moon, then the Summer Moon would ultimately be recorded by the Beach Boys as the Surfer Moon.
Exactly.
So these songs, again, Brian was. I was mentioning Gary Usher because I believe the first time Brian produced a song was October of '62 with Gary, and it's Rachel and the Revolution. And I think this Rachel and the Revolvers,
Yeah.
Revolution #1 being the name of the song, also on YouTube.
Yeah.
And that song is they got a black female artist to record it. And so one of the things that became very apparent to me and very clear to me that's not discussed much when it comes to Brian is his love for R&B.
Yeah.
And he didn't do it with the Honeys because if he had Ginger Blake sing lead, he would have gotten that same type of soulful sound
R&B
he did
flavor.
with Bob and Sherry. And if you listen to the Bob and Vicky recording, also on YouTube, um, and Sharon Marie stuff is all kind of soulful.
She was great. Yeah.
And she just had a deep voice for a 16-year-old.
Yeah.
And it was great. And I love also, for those who have Brian Wilson's 2010 Brian Wilson Reimagines Gershwin album, we see Brian working with Gershwin music for the first time in 1963 with the flip side to Run a Run Lover on the song Summertime.
Right.
And I love that. This is like how long it took him to realize that love of that music. It took him all those years from '63 to 2009 to where we recorded it to get the album out in 2010. That's a significant journey, and to have been given the keys to the Gershwin estate is another big deal.
That's a super underrated album. I love that record. It doesn't
It's
get
my
talked about as much as it should. It's really special.
it's my favorite Brian Wilson solo album.
Is it really?
Yes.
Wow.
My I love all his records. Getting Over My Head would probably be my least favorite, but
Same.
there's a couple I don't, and I'm not discussing the live Brian Wilson albums. I'm just talking about the studio
I
releases.
studio. Yeah,
I
yeah.
like Imagination for Mom. I like that it I, I like it. I listen to it every once in a while. I think had it allowed itself to be a Brian Wilson album as opposed to an adult contemporary album,
Yeah.
it might be more interesting to me.
Yeah.
But Maria Imagines Gershwin and That Lucky Old Son are both significant releases to me from Brian's catalog. And Gershwin is, you can hear the love Brian has for the catalog. He
He's
he
so stoked
he
on it.
took two songs. When I got married in 11/11/11, our first dance song was the Like and I Love You.
Oh, great. Perfect.
So you crept into my heart. I mean, come on. I mean, you don't. The Gershwin catalog, the Gershwin estate says, "Hey, Brian Wilson, you're the greatest songwriter." I mean, that had to be the thought process. I mean, why else would you? So I love that way back when we're talking. Here's a guy who was trying to figure out I know I'm writing songs, so I just really wonder. He's such an explorative and ambitious artist at this period in his life. In terms of, I'm not just a Beach Boy. I just don't think he thought that way. And I think because of books and documentaries and everything else, and the way they've covered the group's history, I think we're kind of meant to think that he did.
So that's the question I was gonna actually come to at some point in our chat. Do you think Brian experimented with producing other people to make himself better for the Beach Boys, or do you think he just enjoyed being a part of the creative process, no matter who he was involved with?
I think this goes back to the sponge. He wanted to be involved with as many. The way I look at it is in my subjective view, because of the amount of work that he was doing, and not just the Beach Boys,
Right.
is he wanted to just find as much as he could about the music. I don't know if he was thinking music industry, but it's clear to me he was really hungry from an ambitious and creative, more ambitious standpoint than creative standpoint. I don't know that he was concerned about being creative. I've never thought of him that way. I think people call him a genius or refer to him as a brilliant songwriter because it's not like he stumbled upon what he did,
Right.
right? He didn't stumble upon it, but I don't know that he purposely set out with Pet Sounds to make the album that would make Paul McCartney cry. That was the
No,
result of the recordings.
it was
So
something
that's what
inside
I'm
of him.
saying. How we reflect on Pet Sounds and most of the music world considers it to be at the top of the echelon of any great album discussion,
Right.
rightly so. He just was doing what he felt in the moment, and that's something that never changed until I would say later in his career, where they would start to have ideas about what they wanted it to be. And that was usually people around him helping construct the idea of what the project would be.
Sure.
But back in those days, and I would say this is true up until even Love You, Brian just being he became a creative force, but in these early days, 62, 63, all of 63, going into 64 is where it changes,
Big time.
where we see the change. And I think especially based on the historic documentation I got from Sharon Marie, stuff that just is mind blowing. I mean, I included 2 pages of the stuff in this issue of the handwritten letter from Brian to Sharon Marie and
I
a couple
love
of
that
pages.
letter.
So Brian is telling her that he and his father Murray are a production team.
Right.
And there's a letter from Mike saying he is her manager.
That one blows my mind.
Okay, and then you look at the photos that I included, which are Carl Engman, the A&R guy at Capitol Records. I think
Yeah.
that was his title, along with Mike and Brian and Sharon Marie in a number of photos, specifically just the 4 of them.
Yeah.
And then there's Carl and Dennis Wilson are added, and I wrote notably, there's no Al Jardine and there's no David Marks. Now, why
Right.
is that? Why are Dennis and Carl even there? So this is a blip in time, October of 63, where I believe that Murray was toying with the idea. Murray, I don't know about Brian. Brian must have been toying with the idea because they went to the length of having these photos done.
Yeah.
There was something thought about and Mike was going to manage her. He was managing her. He was cutting her checks.
Right.
So this was in full, and this is amazing to me that this isn't discussed because this. But again, it's such a little microbe of this Beach Boys universe again.
It's
But
just it's incredible though because so much was happening in such a short amount of time and they knew how important the guys were individually or as a whole to create something for other people because that's also where you make money. In case your own band stops working, you can still produce and still be a member of the music world.
and maybe that was the process. Maybe that was the idea.
Maybe that was it. Yeah,
But
maybe.
you look at it and so 63 is going. It's bizarre because she has her first single, Run Around Lover, Back with Summertime, come out in October of 63.
Right.
And those photos are done. And then they go on tour. Other sessions continue for Beach Boys records. But at the same time now, by October of 63, Brian has worked with Jan and Dean beginning in March of 63, where they hear Surfing USA. He says, well, I've got Gonna Hustle You, and I've got, Gonna Hustle You would eventually become New Girl in School, but the Beach Boys also had an unreleased version of it called All Dressed Up for School.
Right.
So this was, again, all this crossover stuff. Brian was creating and writing with different people, and I think it really served him well because it informed him.
Yeah, I
It
agree.
it provided him by working with, and what I love about the Sharon Marie story, which people will learn when they get the issue, is that Brian and Mike wrote the songs for her together.
Yeah.
This wasn't just records that it wasn't Brian. Yes, Brian was producing and arranging and writing the songs, but Mike and Brian both wrote "Thinking About You, Baby" and "Run Around Lover."
Yeah.
And so this was a Mike and Brian Murray team thing. And Mike's letters are to Sharon Marie are even on the Sea of Tunes letterhead.
Letterhead. Yeah,
So
right.
Mike was aboard. He was a part of the plan. This
Right.
was this, and this is the first time this has been disclosed ever. And I'm thinking to myself, how is that possible?
And
That's
and these songs were written specifically for her in mind. Like this was a
yes,
project. This was a whole entity unto itself. Yeah, this wasn't like
yeah.
Boys Leftovers. It was like, no, we're gonna focus on her and make her into something.
So what happened, my opinion, was they just got too successful. The Beach Boys did as that group, and it, Vicky Coker even talked about it in her interview where Brian invited her down to, like, they went down to the studio together one day, and this is post her time as Bob and Vicky, but so
Yeah.
then she walked in with Brian to a session, and then they all looked at her like, what is she doing here? Yeah, because they were the Beach Boys and they just didn't want distractions. They too were all, I mean, again, here are a bunch of guys in their early 20s and they're just trying to, like, is this going to work?
Yeah.
Nobody knows.
Right.
Like and what they all say, Al has said it, David Marks has said it, Carl's not here to say it, but Dennis has said it in different interviews, even late in his life in different ways. Um, everyone knew, everyone knew very early on that Brian had something special.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the key to this whole thing is, and again, I don't think Brian was thinking, oh, I'm going to write this type of song or that type of song. I think he was, by working with Gary Usher, that informed him because Gary had experience.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
And I think he really helped inform Brian because when they went to sign the Capitol deal, I think I just heard on Dave Gavrow's Disc Graffiti thing, it was Jim Murphy, I think, who said it, talked about it, how they went to sign the thing and Gary Usher wouldn't sign one type of contract, like it had to do with licensing and publishing. And Murray was pissed off at Usher as they went down the elevator to leave. And Gary Usher said, you don't know, you don't understand. I just saved you a lot. I just made us a lot of money.
Yeah.
You didn't lose anything.
Right.
And that's because Murray was in over his head and didn't know what he was doing as a manager. He didn't know. I think he took a deal, like the contract was for $500 instead of $5,000. I mean, just because he didn't know how to negotiate, he just thought, oh, my boy's got a deal.
Right.
Um,
Run with it.
so
Yeah.
he didn't know what he was doing any more than I think any of, whether Brian or Mike or Al or anybody knew what they were doing. It was, I think, as most people, there's very few people in the entire music industry story or history that knew what they were doing. And one person who knew what he was doing, and I don't know when he learned it, but it was Bob Gaudio when he met Frankie Valli, knew
True.
what he was doing. He knew
Yeah.
all about publishing and licensing and everything. And
Yeah.
from the very beginning with Frankie. So, but I don't know enough about that history to understand where that began. But very few people, when they get successful, have an understanding of all the trap doors and pratfalls and business crap that they can. I mean, the Beatles were a great example of a group that got taken advantage of,
Completely.
and then they fixed it. Like
Painfully.
nobody's business.
Yeah.
To this day, like nobody's business. So see, they figured that out and
Yeah.
managed to. I guess when you have a name that a computer company wants, that helps too.
Hey, it
Um,
doesn't hurt. Yeah.
So this is it's the beautiful thing about Brian as a young artist, and this exploration of he's got his roommate and the next door neighbor, and then they form a group, and in the same time he meets this young girl who's 16 years old, who's got this deep soulful voice. She's white, but she sounds like a black artist, and that's what he wants because he did this revolution song with another female black recording artist, and that's what he likes. He likes that, and he can't do that with the boys.
Hmm.
So he's pursuing that, and that much you can say because he does pursue that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's because there wasn't chart success or if it was something else that caused him to move away from that. Because even then, he moved away from Bob and Vicky really quickly.
Right.
Um, it wasn't long before the Honeys and Sharon Marie came into the picture.
Yeah.
I mean, almost overlapping,
Yeah.
and it's just like, okay, well, this is the next thing that I'm putting my attention on. I mean, this is true of Brian. I think you can see this anywhere historically in his career, at any date in his life, where it's most clear is in the late '60s and early '70s, where Brian started to work on A World of Peace Must Come with Stevie Kalnick and
Sure.
lost interest. He then started to work on Cows in the Pasture
That's the
and lost
pastor.
interest.
Yeah.
He started to work with Don Goldberg and felt so bad that he managed to record two of his songs, and because he was done because they'd lost interest.
Right. Yeah.
So, but that's how Brian was in the early days too. He would work on something, and I just get the sense that if it wasn't working for him, he just went
Move
on to
on.
the next thing. He just moved on because he wanted. It wasn't a path of least resistance. It was, what can I absorb? How can I inform myself?
Yeah. Well, that's kind of a good jump to the next question I want to ask you. Two-parter. First part, if you could, do you have one favorite Brian production outside of the Beach Boys from that time frame? Second part of the question, what artist or group should have had a longer career or could have kept going if the momentum was there from either inside the Beach Boys camp or Capitol or Brian's devoted interest, outside of the group? What group should have kept going for them and why?
Well, okay. So the first question, Jan and Dean, Surf City.
Okay, that was easy.
Yeah, and kind of hustle you to me is fantastic too. Even when
Yeah.
when they changed it to When Summer Comes, Get a Chance with You, which was also risque. I don't understand. I don't understand how that's risque. Gonna gonna hustle you, hustle.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
yeah. All right. Hustle's a strong word. I don't know. Um, but so Jan and Dean by far, because it was Jan and Dean led to my discovery of everything Beach Boys
Sure.
and Brian. So that's easy.
They were the gateway.
Um, but he did not produce. I mean, he worked on those recordings, but he started them. So there was his arrangement, but he didn't really ultimately finish the production on those. Jan Berry did.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
and they were on Liberty Records, so they're not really a group of his. I would say Sharon Marie
I had a feeling you would say that because I feel that way too. Yeah.
because they had. I don't know why just two singles were done. I don't. That's a quandary to me. Even with all the stuff I have, it, you know.
On a major label too. It's like they would have kept going. It's like just try a couple more, see what happens, see what sticks.
Again, I think the timing of their success
Yeah.
is what was the nail in the coffin for anything going on outside the peripheral of what was happening for the Beach Boys.
I agree. I mean, if the Beach Boys thing, if that ship starts to sink, everything else goes by the wayside. So you got to keep the original crew happy, and then
And
what else happens
and
after
it was full sail. I
I
mean,
mean that.
the sails was up, the wind was at their back. They
I
became
mean,
more and more popular, and as they went in to '64, they had just had a moderate hit with Little Saint Nick um,
yeah.
in
If you
late
get
'63.
Don't Worry,
And
Baby, I Get Around, like,
oh my gosh, so you enter '64, you have Don't Worry Baby, Fun Fun Fun, right in the early day, and Warmth of
yeah,
the Sun.
yeah,
And those three songs are just like, okay,
Something
Something
special's happening here.
something special's happening here. And Don't Worry Baby is where you for the first time get to hear Brian's influence that he gleaned from Phil Spector.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
things are becoming bigger.
Right.
Brian is now just not he's taking everything that he's gotten by working with Roger Christian and Gary Usher and really Bob Norberg and the guys who were in the Survivors and anything that Brian worked on with Bob because Bob did co-write Keep an Eye on Summer
Yeah.
that would
Right.
end up also on Shutdown Volume 2, which is a beautiful track.
And
Uh,
imagination.
uh, so I Brian I think would have continued to work with whoever was in front of him and whoever he would be allowed to work with
That too.
because his father was still in the picture.
Yeah. Right.
And so this was still Shutdown Volume 2 gets released. It's still not Murray has been fired yet.
Yeah.
That
Right.
would be a couple of months away.
Yeah. And a few
So
hours later.
so when they do that, then Sharon Marie's second single comes out in June of '64, Thinking
Yeah.
About You Baby. By that time they fired Murray. So I don't know if that also played into the decision of we've gotten rid of Murray's no longer a part of this, and Murray was going to produce her with him, with Brian. So maybe that was a factor.
I mean, he
I
was
think
involved. In all this stuff, so yeah.
Brian could have gone on
Yeah.
with him, doing it himself. But I just think when you look at what they did in June and July, they recorded 2 albums consecutively, the All Summer Long and Christmas record. And Brian is drawn strongly. Again, another incredibly informed moment for Brian when he works with Dick Reynolds,
Yeah.
the string arranger and conductor of the Four Freshmen records.
His idols.
That is a defining and informed moment for Brian. I think it's a transformative moment for him. But then they go on tour. They go on tour again. And Brian's involved. He's on the tours with them. He manages one. Now, this is based on Andrew Doe's great Bellagio website.
Hmm.
We see in October of '64, Brian does the first session for Guess I'm Done with Glenn Campbell.
Mm.
Then sometime in November, December timeline, he manages to get a session in for Kiss Me Baby. So there's not a much music being recorded in that 2-year period. From July, they do, the concert album, but that's
Right.
just them showing up and playing a gig and then it's recorded.
Yeah.
So Brian in the studio, legitimately, from a creative standpoint, hasn't happened since July of '64. And I think that's really important to understand when you take that information and you place it with Brian having a nervous breakdown on a plane.
Absolutely.
I think there's different perspectives. I wasn't there. Some would say, well, Brian maybe just did that on purpose so he could get out of tune. Well,
Could be.
understandably, he wasn't in the studio. He wasn't creating. I imagine he probably traveled with a notebook or legal pad or something where he would write ideas down, but he wasn't in the studio, and that's where he wanted to be. That's
Yeah.
is the one thing that I think, as an opinion, is really, really accurate. It's more factually based than opinion based. Of my study of everything, the Beach Boys, Brian was a studio guy. He wanted to be in the studio, and for him not to be in the studio for almost, a good 4 months
Once. Yeah.
is considering the output to the point where it stops. What would he have done in that window of time? Now, there's a lot of photos of him over during, the European tour in November, December of '64,
Right.
and he's smiling. They're in Paris. That's the California girls
Sure,
picture.
it's fun.
Yeah, he's
Yeah.
definitely having a good time. He's
Yeah.
got a
Sure.
little camera with him. Um,
If anyone knows anyone who has those tapes, let us watch them, please. Because there's got to be some
no
crazy stuff on
kidding.
those tapes.
Oh my God, Dennis has got a hold of it at one
Oh,
point. I mean, somebody's got to have that
it's gotta
somewhere.
be
But
a
that would just
trip.
I would love to sit in a quiet room and just watch it. Just
Uh,
watch,
it's
just to
probably
see.
they're probably silent. Yeah, but it's just like
Yeah, but
amazing,
so
like
what? Oh my God, he just put music to it. So Brian does not look unhappy, but I just think it's the reality of Brian being on such an incredible creative streak and then it kind of drying up, and him only being able, see, let's say Andrew's site isn't exactly correct. Maybe there was a couple of other sessions that we don't know about here or there, but for Brian to be on the road that much and not in the studio, I feel 100% was probably a very hard thing for him,
Oh yeah.
because of what you see that when you look at the projectile, the type of music he was producing, and that although he didn't have chart success really with the other acts he was doing, he had a number one hit with Surf City.
Yeah.
So
Right.
he was changing music. He was changing. When you turned on the radio, "Don't Worry Baby" was a movement up from "Warmth of the Sun." "Fun, Fun, Fun" was a movement up. I mean, it was just this constant shift of better music,
Every
and
time. Yeah.
every time. And so I just think I do not. I would understand a panic attack or a nervous breakdown on a plane to get out of the situation so
Yeah.
that he could get back in the studio because he had had enough.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. I mean, like that was his happy place, and any Beach Boys fan knows that. Like he just loves creating and the process.
I'm kind of pissed off about it now because I realize if he hadn't been touring, he would have been in the studio and God knows what he would have come up with. I mean, he came up with some great stuff when he got back.
Yeah,
If he had been in the studio in that chunk of period, maybe Guess I'm Done would have been finished earlier, or
yeah.
who know? I don't know. But I'm waiting for the day was also written in '64. I'm waiting for the day and Guess I'm Dumb. And
So weird to think about.
but imagine you just take those two songs as an example, and Kiss Me Baby, all in '64. Had he been home, I and I'm just thinking that of piggybacking off of the work that he had done from Dick Reynolds, and what would he have done just if he had had the opportunity to take the immediacy of that influence
Yeah.
and gone into something with a conducting thing in mind. I don't know. I mean, it surely would it would show up as it would show up on the second side of Today, which was not long after that.
Exactly.
The Today album is exactly like the Christmas album. Side one is pop recordings. Side
Right.
two is with the Christmas album it was traditional music, but it was more heavier composed melancholy. The same is true with the Today album,
Yeah,
with
exactly.
the exception of the little joke.
Yeah, at the end, yeah.
Yeah, there's Cassius Love versus, is that no, or is that our
It's
favorite
full
recording?
session. Full session.
Full Session with Big Daddy. Yeah, Cassius Love versus Sonny Wilson.
That's another classic. Um, well, let's wrap it up there because like what would you say now that you've done two of these issues and you've had some fascinating conversations with people about what life was like with Brian, what life was like in, Southern California at that time and growing up. I mean, these people were in their teens and early 20s. They were kids. So it's like, what so far has he been doing this project? What's been your, I don't want to say biggest takeaway because that's kind of a cop out question, but like, what's been your favorite discovery from chatting with these people that you caught you by surprise? That maybe had more of a profound influence on how you perceive that era of the Beach Boys.
Everything I just touched, just the letters from Sharon Marie,
Yeah,
the handwritten letter from Brian to Sharon Marie saying, "My dad and I are producing you." Nowhere, anywhere have I ever read that Brian and Murray were a production team.
no,
That Mike was her manager. Nowhere, anywhere have I ever read that Mike was Sharon Marie's manager.
yeah,
So that was the most profound, like when I read those, because she doesn't really talk about that specifically. In her interview she talks about how Mike wrote her a lot, and things like that, but she doesn't say specifically. But so to have those letters, I had what I would call a product shot. She sent me a photo
yeah,
of her Runaround Lover acetate on top of all these fanned out letters, and I said, "Is there any chance I can get you to send me those letters individually?" And I'm so glad I asked, because I had the same photo from 2011, because Sharon's and Vicky's interviews appeared in the spring 2011 edition of ESQ.
right,
And it just was like a banner going across the bottom. And I thought I would really like, so I had that. The announcement came of the Cows in the Pasture album that's supposed to
Yeah,
come out in the third or fourth quarter of this year. And
push back.
the announcement came in early 2024 through Rolling Stone's website,
Right.
an article by Andy Green. And that got me thinking. And I said, well, I also have Dean and Brian and Jan talking about Surf City and
Yeah.
Gonna Hustle You, so I should include that. And I just thought, hey, I've got quite a bit of stuff here. Um, so that's kind of what started this whole journey. But
Yeah.
you know, the Sharon Marie thing, I'm so glad I asked her for those individual pages. I still have the VIP members of ESQ are getting an additional at least 10 pages of letters.
That's awesome.
So
That's so cool.
that is, I mean, again, you know, it's just, and it's crazy, and they're dated. Mike dated his letters.
Yeah.
It's just really cool that you can place when this was written, where it was written from. You know, it's all very very cool stuff, and it literally is a treasure. Just Sharon Marie's stuff alone is just like
Yeah.
this incredible treasure trove of stuff that I just never would have dreamt that I would even see. And it's amazing to me that no one has ever asked for it or uncovered it or had any. There was no linkage to the fact that Brian and Murray were going to be a production team, and we have this in Brian's own handwriting. So this is a
My takeaway from that is that she probably that was so normalized for her that she would never thought twice about it because she probably thought that's how everyone
she
did it.
moved on, right? It was
She
over. It
moved
was a
on. It was a couple months in the 60s. She'd had her life. Who would
yeah
have thought? You know, that's one of the cool
yeah.
things about doing these deep dives is like you uncover gold like that. And for a band that's had everything written about them, every breath they've ever taken has been written about them, you uncovered something new 60 years down the line. And it's like, what else is out there that we haven't discovered yet? And like that's what I love about this magazine is like you guys do the freaking deep dive Sherlock Holmes stuff that like is so essential to their story. And it's always done with respect. I think that's the cool thing about it too. But so man, I could talk about this for hours even, man. But where can people find you? What's the website? Where can they find you?
Well, the easy. I mean, if you're on Facebook or something like that, we have an account on Facebook. It's just type in Endless Summer Quarterly. You could do that using your search engine. That should take you to esquarterly.com, esquarterly.com. And if you want to know more about the magazine, how long it's been around and how it came about, etc., there's an About button. It kind of gives you a history of how it started. It started out in San Diego with Rick Edgell and Phil Mast, and I've been doing it since August of '93. Um,
Same.
and
As long as I've been alive.
there's a magazine subscription button. There's the VIP option. There's a VIP button actually if you click on that if you want to become a VIP member. So that's a full year subscription just like anybody else, but you get bonus full color newsletters of content that I just sent out the first one yesterday. So that one was just kind of reviews, some that are online, some that aren't. So this is I wanted to kind of I didn't do that last time around, so I want to create a newsletter that kind of goes out to them during the year here.
Yeah,
But as we go forward, there will be the summer edition number 150. It will be ESQ's 150th issue,
unbelievable.
and believe it. Um, I have to say that to myself.
Yeah,
Um,
right. You've done all the work. Yeah,
oh my God! So yeah, these are all ESQs back here, all the way, just and what I'm gonna do. I got Stephen McParland. Now, if anyone doesn't know Stephen J. McParland, if you don't know that name, it's his last name is spelled Parland, is in David
yeah,
McParland. Stephen Stephen J. McParland, and you should Google him. He's got a PDF store.
yes,
It's CM Music, but you can find him pretty easy. You can purchase his books as PDFs, and his books are invaluable resources to this period that we're talking about, these early
Yeah.
formative days of Brian. He's got a great Gary Usher book, and what Stephen has agreed to do in exchange for me creating ads, because he just put out a Bruce Johnston book.
Oh, cool.
We reviewed that, and and I created ads for him in exchange for the summer edition, which will be basically a Stephen McParland, Gary Usher, Brian Wilson book,
Cool.
ESQ,
Sweet.
because I wanted to find a way to include Brian's work with Gary, and it would have been too encumbersome for me to try to fit it into these other two issues and spread it across with all these other acts that Brian worked with.
Yeah.
So I want to have a standalone summer. I think that's what the summer edition will be, is a Gary Usher, Brian Wilson edition. It's kind of a stop one piece. And then in the fall, I've got these names written down. So it's Dean Torrance from Jan and Dean talking about vegetables. So now you're 66, 67.
It's nothing
Brian
great.
going back into the studio in December of 68 with the Honeys,
Mm-hmm.
followed by Steve Kalinich's A World of Peace Must Come,
Yep.
followed by Fred Vale's Cows in the Pasture,
Timely.
followed by David Sandler, Spring. I've done a brand new interview with him.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so
Great
he
album.
worked on Spring. And then Don Goldberg, I have an interview with him that I never used because the whole interview was almost him retelling me his book, and I felt bad. I didn't want him to not sell his book. It was almost a complete retelling. But I think I'm going to do that. And I've reached out to Danny Hutton. Fingers crossed I get a hold of Danny, because I think that's the piece to this whole kind of this kind of Brian goes in, he does pets, his focus goes off outside acts. And I should say the second one, we also have Paul Peterson of the Donna Reed Show, She Rides With Me,
Right.
and Guess I'm Done with Glenn Campbell. I had a archival interview with Glenn from 2003.
So cool.
So he's talking about Guess I'm Done in here.
He's great.
So that ends with 65. And so Brian didn't really do much in terms of outside production because he was really focused on, they did the Party album, then he did Little Girl I Once Knew, and then he started immediately working on Pet Sounds.
Right.
And that really was his intention and focus into 66, followed by the Smile Sessions. We all know that, well, most of us know that story.
Yeah.
So he didn't really go back to working with outside people again until Dean is the one who liked vegetables and did that, and then Brian would record on it with Marilyn and Diane
Yeah.
in early 70s. So that's another odd story because Dean took it, he recorded his own version of Vegetables. So that's like a two-part story because
Love that song, man.
and then Brian and Diane and Marilyn would come in and they would add vocals later for the version that appeared on the anthology album,
so weird.
not the Laughing Gravy version.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
so that's kind of its own story. So I like the kind of the picking up. Oh God, I really hope I get Danny Hutton. I don't want to. I'll figure it out. I really want to. I so bad want to talk to him.
I hope so,
Because
man. That's gonna tie it all together. He's essential to get in that issue.
yeah. So then it would be like 66, 67,
Yeah.
all the way through to the early 70s, where Brian again stops. Spring is kind of the end of the road where Brian again stops working
Yeah.
on different things. And gosh, the World of Peace Must Come with Stevie Kalinich and the Cows in the Pasture with Fred
Yeah.
were like a day or two worth of attention, and then he just.
That was it.
So I'm very curious about this Cows in the Pasture album that's coming out with all the guest vocalists that'll be out this year, and Brian's listed as the executive producer. So
We'll find out.
it's curious, but it's good timing because so again, that inspired the whole train of thought where I started thinking about all this.
Right.
And I thought, gosh, I've got quite a bit. And then I was thinking it was going to be like a one-off issue. And then when I realized all the content I had, I thought, no, this is going to be 2 volumes. And then out of the blue, I get an email from Stephen McParland saying, hey, I got this new Bruce book. And I go out to his site and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. And I've actually got the physical Gary Usher book. I've had it for years.
Oh, sweet. Yeah.
So that's I already had it beside my desk as I was working on these other issues, which is because I wanted to see what Brian's first production was. I wanted to get that sense of when it started for him.
Right,
So
right.
that's October '62 with Rachel and the
Sure.
Revolvers. Rachel and the Revolvers. So
So cool.
it's so much stuff. I mean, it's just as soon again you get as soon as you go into one little thing, there's this something else over here, and it's kind of like
Beach Boys rabbit hole.
peeling. Well, yeah, it's like peeling a banana, and you think there's only four sides, but you've pulled down four sides, and what's this? And you
It's
pull down that, so why is there still a why are there more sides? Like it's a
multiple
never-ending
bananas.
banana. It
Yeah,
just won't ever quite open. You have to keep
right.
pulling back, and it's or more like an onion. But I think I like a banana more because a banana won't make you cry.
Yeah, bananas are funnier. So, well, David, this has been so much fun, man. Everyone who's watching this thing, go subscribe to the magazine. Follow him on. Oh, you guys do an Instagram channel too, but yeah, YouTube, Instagram, all those channels.
Yeah.
Facebook, of course.
Not yeah,
Um,
Instagram and YouTube, and we got some more episodes of our video series coming up soon. That should be up when time permits me to do them. I'm in the middle of folding my Beach Boys laundry right now. The new issue is going out, and you got your exclusive preview. But the new issue is going out. I try to explain to people it's as exciting as folding laundry. I have to label the envelopes, I have to stamp the envelopes, I have to stuff the envelopes, and then I have to seal the envelopes, and then I have to go mail them. Which
riveting.
it is riveting. It's as exciting as wearing this shirt.
Well, when you talk to Mike, ask him to come over and help you out with it one day.
Well, I
Yeah,
don't. Yeah,
sign a couple. David, man, this was awesome. And yeah, this will be, I think people are gonna really enjoy this issue coming up and the one that's out now too. But thanks again for hanging out, man.
oh, it's always I love coming on here. Thank you.
Thanks.